and everyone, welcome to today's event honoring Will Mitchell. I want to thank you for all joining us. I also want to thank the SMS for envisioning this event and then reaching out to me to coordinate it. That's really meaningful to me, but I know that Will touched so many other people that that's not something I could do on my own, so I had to reach out to some of my friends and Will's colleagues and co-authors. So special thanks to Gautam Ahuja, Samina Karim, Xavier Martin, Kuwan Singh, and Anand Swaminathan for helping me coordinate this. I'd like to hand it over directly to Africa Arino right now to make an announcement on behalf of the SMS.
Thank you, Myles, and good day to everyone. SMS formally announces that the Strategic Research Foundation Dissertation Research Grant Program is now named the Will Mitchell Dissertation Research Grant Program. As you may know, this is one of 3 grant programs awarded by the SRF, which is the philanthropic arm of the SMS. This program supports 10 to 15 doctoral students each year with grants of up to $10,000 to support elements of the students' research that in some way enrich their dissertation projects. And I hope that you will concur that this is a very appropriate way to pay an enduring tribute to Will. Thank you, Myles. Back to you.
Great, thank you, Africa. As you said, I think that is a really special tribute. So on behalf of all of Will's students and his friends, we really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the SMS in choosing that specific tribute. So to get on with today's webinar, as Africa mentions, many of you in the SMS probably know Will through his scholarship, his advising, and his role in SMJ. However, when the 6 of us gathered to think about this tribute, we're all co-authors of Will, so naturally we thought about scholarship, but our conversation turned to be much more broad. So it's not only Will's scholarship, but we know of his efforts in teaching and programs and thinking about the importance of having an impact beyond a very focused, set of people in academia. So we thought that the best way to remember Will would be to remember his contributions across this range of activities. And I do want to note that we do plan to have a special event at the SMS in London to focus on his scholarship in particular. So before handing it over and getting going with the other speakers, I'd just like to take a minute to reflect a few of my interactions with Will. I knew him for over 30 years. My first year at Michigan as a PhD student, I think was only his second year as an assistant professor. His class was one of the first I took as a PhD student and my first strategy class. He was a co-author on my first publication, my dissertation co-chair. We worked on a number of projects together and we served on the SMS board. Still remember the first day when everyone was introducing themselves in class. He asked for people to talk about their names and where they were from. He said I was from Canada. He said, where in Canada? I said, Western Canada. He said, where in Western Canada? So I grew up in Alberta, Will in the interior of British Columbia. And this was a connection and something we'd reflect about a lot. And it was always for me a very special connection with Will. But also what became clear to me was Will had the ability to make these connections with all sorts of people in all sorts of different ways. And I'm sure many will reflect on that. So getting back to this notion of a connection. So yeah, it was natural when we'd see each other or talk to each other. It was very easy for a conversation to get started, even if we hadn't been with each other for a little while. And for those of you who know Will, there wasn't a whole lot of time for small talk or chit chat. So naturally our conversations turned to job talk or, turned to business talk. But the other thing, reflecting on the theme of today's webinar, this was not just about scholarship. We often talked about teaching, and not just the classes we were teaching or the programs that we were in, but how we were engaging with students and why we were doing that. We talked about, what are some of the ways to make our scholarship more useful and have an impact, try and solve important problems. And for me, it was always thinking about, on reflection now, it's about making a difference. And we didn't talk about it at the 50,000 foot level of making a difference. It's really talking about doing specific things. But clearly, when I think about it now, it's about making a difference. So that's why today's event is so special to me. This notion of being an academic where I'm more than a scholar, but I also care about teaching and I also care about making an impact. That role, Will has served as a role model to me and a mentor. And I think that's really important in my life as an academic. And I think it's great that we can reflect on that. I also think it's great that, many of you in the audience who might not have known Will as well, might not understand his contributions beyond the issue of very focused scholarship. And it's really a chance for us to share Will's contributions in this broader sense. So thank you for giving me a couple minutes to reflect on my interactions with Will and the notion of why we wanted to set up the event to look like this. So now I'd like to hand it over to Mahka.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mahka Moeen from University of North Carolina. I had the privilege of being Will's collaborator in a mentee-mentor relationship, even though we never shared a university. He was not on my PhD committee. And as much as the geographic proximity between Duke and University of North Carolina can imply, we were never in the same region at the same time. And that's really what I want to focus on today, this issue of Will's dedication to nurture talent and spread his wisdom way beyond the institutional and geographic boundaries of where he worked. And of course, we can talk a lot about Will's scholarship, as Myles referred to, and we cannot do justice to that in a 1-hour session. We can talk about Will's pragmatism in his research approach, his fierce advocacy for his beliefs, his nonprofit global health work, and his leadership in foundational institutions such as SMS and SMJ. And what a fitting attribute to him to have the SRF dissertation be named after him. So thanks to SMS for doing that. So in this spirit, what I'm going to focus on my very brief remarks is around the firsthand experience that I had to be Will's mentee and see his dedication in mentoring junior scholars in creating the bigger scholarly community where we all belong. And Will, of course, had many, many doctoral students, mentored each of them with patience, with generosity, and each of them went to have many other doctoral students. So we're seeing that multiplier effect in his mentorship. But I think what his spirit of mentorship really exemplified was this idea of going beyond the boundaries of geography and his employer context, and instead focusing on ideas, on knowledge. And that was what shaped his circle, his chosen village, the community that he belonged. And here is where, although he focused his scholarship on 3 modes of build, borrow, and buy, that was for firms. That was not for him. When he was mentoring junior scholars, he operated in only one mode: build, build, and build. And that's where I say he built and recognized junior talent. He built growth opportunities for them. And he built the context for knowledge exchange. And he didn't have to worry about building the output, the papers at the end. They themselves just happened. And I can think of 3 ways in which Will was very much engaged in this process. It was, of course, the default person that you could always rely on to say yes when you invited him to a mentorship session, to PDWs, to consortia, to discussion sessions and conferences. And this was often the starting point of how I myself got to know him, built a relationship toward a co-authorship relationship, and many others that collaborated with him in this fashion. And this continued dedication and commitment to provide feedback, to share the process of research and pass his wisdom in these interactions is really a lot more important, I would say, that collaborations that resulted in actual co-authorship. And since time was limited, and hey, we didn't know how limited our time will be, I don't think he was trying to do all of this mentorship by himself. So the other learning lesson out of his process of being a great scholar was to build institutions, to focus on forums where others could then connect with the junior talent that he wanted to mentor and nurture. And that takes me to perhaps many activities he was involved at SMS, at CCC, and many other entrepreneurship events at University of Toronto and Duke and beyond. And let me end by sharing a few of my reflections of what I've learned from Will in terms of mentoring and how his impact in this area was really amplified. I think the first principle that you could see all the time from Will was this idea of co-creation, and that he was not a mentor who would dictate his ideas to you. He was not there to supervise. He was there to guide you. And then in that process, you could co-create the output. And this had an impact in terms of how he dealt with the process, the engagement that he had. Will was not a person to have very long bi-weekly meetings. Instead, you could always call him. There would have been 5 or 6 20-minute meetings throughout the week because he wanted to know exactly what's going on in the paper, whether it be those color-coded spreadsheets that his co-authors or students know about them, or just debating over and over about the appropriate vocabulary, the terms to choose for the paper. And I think a lot of this was facilitated by what Myles said, and I echo as well, the personal connection that he built with co-authors, that he really invested in knowing you as an individual and knowing that if he gets and builds that connection, then you can better build scholarship together. And that's an area that outside of co-authorship, I have immensely benefited from having Will as a pillar of strength in moments of hardship and difficulty. And that's something I hope we can all continue and learn and would be his legacy moving forward. So thank you for your time. I'll now pass it to Connie.
All right, thank you all for coming. I guess I wouldn't say it's a pleasure to be here under the circumstances, but I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Connie Helfat. I'm a professor at the Tuck School of Business. I've been asked to talk about Will as a co-editor of SMJ. And so I will give you some sort of highlights of that experience. But I wanted to say first that a lot of my comments are going to echo what Myles and Mahka have said already in yet a different part of Will's life. And I'm sure that other people are going to pick up on some of these themes. But, you know, I met several people on this panel through Will during visits to Michigan and Duke when he was on the faculty of those schools, which I think, again, speaks to Will's inclination to connect all the people in his life. And he was always so positive. He'd always say, I want you to meet so-and-so because this person is really great, you know? And I mean, that's one of the things I appreciated most about Will. I'd say in addition to his enduring friendship, which Mahka just mentioned, I mean, he would always ask about my children. It was like the first thing he would ask about. I mean, he cared about people in addition to scholarship. And then, of course, there's his outsized influence on our field. And part of this impact, of course, was through his work as a co-editor of SMJ for many, many years. And so I worked with Will when he was a co-editor of SMJ, first when I was associate editor, and then when I became a co-editor of the journal. And so I want to talk about a few things that sort of stand out for me in my experiences with Will. So the first thing is that Will was absolutely passionate about and devoted to continually improving the journal, and partly because he thought the success of the journal was, and I think still is, critical to the viability of the field of strategic management. And so in Will's words, which are still on the SMJ website, SMJ is, quote, the leading mass impact journal in strategic management. And Will was always thinking of new initiatives we could pursue to improve the journal. You know, one of the things he championed was question-focused empirical research that didn't necessarily test hypotheses. And the forthcoming special issue on this type of research that Will co-editor is actually an outcome of this strong interest of his. Another thing he championed was the importance of open-mindedness with respect to research methods. So for that reason, he pushed the co-editors to write editorials and primers on different types and approaches to research, including both qualitative and quantitative research. And those primers, I hope, are still up on the SMS website. Secondly, Will put in place numerous procedures and processes to make the journal run smoothly. All the back end is really critical to be able to get authors constructive feedback on their papers in a timely fashion. So he worked with the managing editor tirelessly to improve the routines for processing papers electronically. He worked with all the associate editors about the nuts and bolts of being an editor, all the procedures used at SMJ. And I'd say everything that's in place today that makes SMJ run smoothly is part of Will's legacy, for sure. So then the third thing, which I don't know if anyone's flagged quite as directly, is that Will did more work than any of us. I mean, I have no idea where he got all the time and energy, considering everything else that he did, which other people are talking about. But, you know, for example, many times I would log off email at night. I mean, like 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. First thing in the morning, there would be an email from Will. I mean, you know, I concluded he didn't sleep much. And I personally was always grateful to Will for shouldering so much of the workload. And then, you know, after he stepped down, the co-editors carried on as best we could. But let me tell you, it was impossible to put in as much work as Will did. The fourth thing I call out is Will's remarkably good judgment. You know, whenever there's a question, co-editors had to think about what to do in a particular instance. We would all get together and talk, either by email or we get on the phone at that point because, you know, or Skype, you know, we didn't have Zoom then. And I can't emphasize enough the number of times when Will had just the right answer for how to resolve an issue. I mean, the number of things we dealt with, inquiries from the publisher, authors, associate editors, SMS board, deans of business schools, other journal editors, Scholar One. He was just remarkable in his ability to kind of work through these things and build on what he'd learned before. And so in closing, what I'd say is that Will loved being a journal editor. And after he stepped down from SMJ, he went on to be the editor-in-chief of a healthcare journal, Health Management Policy and Innovation. I mean, healthcare was one of his long-standing research interests, beginning with his dissertation. And he had enormous impact on that field. Just as SMJ, that journal, I think, was just as we were devastated when he passed away. And I know we all miss him greatly. They're really big shoes to fill. So with that, I'd like to pass this over to Anand Swaminathan.
Thanks. Thanks, Connie. Thank you all for attending this webinar. I'm Anand Swaminathan, and I'm on the faculty at the business school at Emory University. So I've known Will for a long time, even longer than Myles. So I met Will. He was 2 years ahead of me in the PhD program at Berkeley. He was in the business and public policy program. I was in the organizational behavior and industrial relations program. But we took a lot of the same courses. I mean, we took the econometric sequence together. Will took, Glenn Carroll's seminar on org theory. I took David Teese's and Williamson's seminars in his area. We even, crossed the bay to learn about survival analysis from Nancy Toomer at Stanford, which involved long, slow rides with Will driving. So I've known him for a long time, and then we became colleagues at Michigan. And one of the things that Will was really passionate about, which I think is very relevant for the future of business education, is bringing his research into the classroom. So we in '94, I just dug up the original syllabus for this experimental course we developed at Michigan, an elective called Strategies for Business Survival. So basically, what this course was about was a mixture of research in evolutionary economics and organizational ecology combined with cases, some of which we cobbled together, some that were available publicly. And we taught this, and some of this involved Will's own research. So I remember one of the, we sort of taught this course as issues that impact firms through their life cycle. So the kinds of issues that impact startups, firms in the growth phase and firms in decline. So the new companies, I remember we paired one of Will's ASQ papers with a case he wrote on a company called Imatron, which was a small startup that basically failed because it didn't have sufficient complementary assets, to commercialize its innovation. So he was very passionate about bringing his research into the classroom, and this course was well received, and it went from being an experimental course to something that was taught regularly by both of us. So that's something that he cared about a lot, and I think it's really important because I think that one of the challenges that business schools face is translating our research into practice, and we haven't done as good a job as, say, engineering schools or even now medical schools, where you have an entire field called translational medicine that's trying to impact practice through research. And I think increasingly, at least in North America, with sort of the gradual decline in demand for graduate business education, it's going to become even more important for us to work on these kinds of translational issues where you bring our research into the classroom. The other thing I wanted to talk about briefly was Will's, and I think Connie mentioned this in terms of the journal, his willingness to step up into leadership roles, whenever he was called upon to do so. I remember we were both, untenured faculty at Michigan and he basically ran the PhD program, then the program that Myles went through and a lot of other students who graduated, Gautam, who we'll hear from later. So he often, he did similar things at other places. At Duke, he was the faculty dean for a while. At Toronto, he became the program dean for the MBA program during a very difficult period during the pandemic. So he has, I think that's one of his qualities, is this ability to step up when needed. So I mean, like Connie, I don't know how we managed to balance all of this, all of these activities, but I think part of it literally came from this passion for the kind of work he was doing. It was, working with him, and we'll be talking more about working with him in London, but it was, I think that the emotion that I want to convey was he almost had a childlike excitement about research or doing research, which was just infectious. And part of this stuff about introducing you to other people who share your interests all had to do with this sort of infectiousness about ideas. And we didn't always agree on things, but our work, I think, was the better because of the discussions we had about both research and teaching. But anyway, so it's had a huge impact on the way I approach teaching. I think over my career since I left Michigan, I've basically chosen to teach subjects that are very close to my research interests and not and that's made a huge difference in terms of the sort of passion you bring to the classroom and how it's received by students, because by its very nature, you're much more interested in stuff that you know a lot about and you're passionate about. So I think he'll be sorely missed, but he's also a role model for how we can think about the broader impact of our research, in reaching out to both students in the classroom and to industry. And I think you'll hear more about that from David Ridley, who's going to talk about the work he did with the healthcare, who runs the healthcare management program at Duke, and that as you will and he spearheaded. So David, it's over to you. Thanks.
That was a great lead-in. Thank you, Anand. As Anand mentioned, I'm David Ridley, and Anand also mentioned the joys of teaching a course that relates to your research. I've been teaching courses on the health sector, and that's my area of interest. And Will and I co-taught a healthcare course at Duke University for 9 years. He was a leader in our health sector management area. He was a leader in the Fuqua strategy area. I want to focus on some lessons I learned from Will, the teacher. As you know, he was a master teacher. And I want to mention 4 lessons from co-teaching with Will. The first lesson, let students speak first. The second, use current data. The third, make decisions quickly. And the fourth, perhaps the most important, take your motorcycle helmet with you to class. So first of all, let students speak first. In Will's classroom, the students spoke first. So Will didn't give much of a preface at the beginning of a class session. He did this for 2 reasons. First, the students had prepared the material and he wanted to reward them. So he didn't want to say something that maybe the students could say. Second, Will felt that if he could get a student involved early in the class, they would remain involved throughout the class. So get students involved right at the start. Let them speak first. Second, use current data. Will and I and many of us sometimes use older cases. Often an older case is the best fit for a topic we want to discuss. But Will was constantly updating his data. And he was very creative with the data sources he would use. He leaned heavily on SEC filings, but he searched broadly for good data sources. So even if he was using an old case, he would regularly update those numbers. Third, which applied to his class and more broadly, it struck me that Will, and Connie mentioned this, Will was really quick to answer emails. And I think that's a character, I wish I were, that is not the case for me, unfortunately. But hats off to Will. Will was really quick with messages. And I think Will's thought was better to have a quick answer than a perfect answer, to keep things moving along with co-authors, with students, with co-teachers, et cetera. And the fourth and final lesson, take your motorcycle helmet to class with you. So sometimes Will would come straight into class. He'd be wearing his motorcycle jacket. He'd be carrying his helmet. It was pretty cool. Now, I think Anand mentioned to me before the session about motorcycles. Now, I'm not one of you. I'm too much of a coward. I'm too scared. But for those of you brave enough or just willing to fake it, I think I highly recommend carrying a motorcycle helmet into class because it looked really cool. So thanks for this. I loved learning from Will in the past, and this is a cool opportunity to talk to him and learn from him once again. So with that, we'll move on to our next topic, which is Will's connections outside of the academy. And we have George Stalk from the Boston Consulting Group. George?
Hi, good morning. After I was invited to join the SMS board, Will was the first person to contact me. And I was surprised. We both were in Toronto together, so we decided to get together and have lunch and talk about the board. We also talked about the ABC strategy that we were going to try to develop and implement at the SMS to attract business people and consultants along with our academics. And it was at that luncheon that we created the notion of doing a survey of the membership, which I'm pleased to say, compared to most surveys I've been involved in, had very high response rates and was very helpful in helping us shape the program. Will and I also co-created the Strategy Imagination Forum, which has been very successful. It's now in its second year. It runs quarterly. And he and I, and then later Sharon Matusik, sponsored these meetings, which have reached attendance levels of B's and C's of as high as 40%. And I give Will a lot of credit for helping put that together and helping manage it. I'm going to miss Will a lot. He was my go-to academic. Whenever I had an interesting idea, or at least I thought was an interesting idea, I go to Will and test it on him, and always got great feedback that helped me develop the ideas. So I'm going to miss him as an SMS colleague. I'm going to miss him as a thought partner, and I'm going to miss him as a friend. Thank you. So I'd like to pass this over to Raman.
Thank you so much. It's really a privilege to be part of this conversation and this panel. My name is Raman Sohal. I am currently a consultant with Core Global, which is based out in Vancouver, BC. I had the privilege of meeting Will back in the winter of 2012 when I was an MBA student. And I then pursued my PhD at the Dalai Lama School of Public Health at the University of Toronto in 2013. And Will was a core member of my PhD thesis committee. Will and I, we both shared a deep passion for the field of global health, and in particular, thinking about how business strategy and business model innovation could help address some of the pressing and critical challenges in the field, especially for underserved populations in low-income communities. After my PhD, I worked with Will closely on several global health projects in Eastern and Southern Africa. When I think of Will, he's had a profound impact on my thinking, and he really shaped how rich my academic journey was at the University of Toronto. He had a deep interest in the field of global health, and he cared deeply about solving important problems in the field. He thought hard about when, how, and why healthcare innovators were able to scale up their models and expand their reach for underserved and hard-to-reach populations in low and middle-income countries. During my MBA, I had the privilege of working with Will and several other graduates from across different disciplines, and this is something that Will excelled at. He brought together minds from across the university from different departments, including medicine, anthropology, and economics. We were focused on an intensive research project, and we examined the critical challenges in the field, and we were sitting over a very messy data set, trying to understand when is it that private sector models that were providing primary healthcare could actually scale their reach. We were looking at models in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Throughout the process, Will brought a very critical and analytical lens to these problems, and he taught us as students to think deeply about how management principles could address some of these pressing challenges. He was instrumental as we grappled with seemingly conflicting goals of scaling up and advancing equity in healthcare access using revenue-generating models. We had intensive discussions and rich conversations on when cross-subsidy models were applicable, where digital technologies such as telemedicine could help drive efficiencies. Over the course of my doctoral journey, Will was pivotal in helping me think through my research design and problems in navigating data collection. I spent a year collecting data from my dissertation in Africa, and I worked with an organization, a healthcare innovator called North Star Alliance. They had converted shipping containers into medical clinics, and they'd set these up along the transit corridors in Eastern and Southern Africa. And they sought to provide care to underserved high-risk populations, largely long-distance truck drivers and female sex workers. Will taught me the importance of being clear and focused and to constantly examine my hypotheses and assumptions. And he also taught me how to manage data in complex, dynamic, and messy contexts. Once I graduated in 2018 from the PhD program, I purposely thought of ways to continue to engage with Will, and I worked with North Star Alliance for another 2 years. Will was always extremely effective and efficient in setting up projects, and he set up 2 global consulting projects whereby 2 teams of Rotman MBA students would work with us at North Star in Kenya and South Africa over an extended period. In South Africa, we poured over data, and Will worked with us as we developed models to figure out when, where, and how could some of the clinics in South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe possibly be turned into fee-for-service revenue-generating clinics. Will was critical as we tried to figure out which assumptions we needed to build into these models. How do we undertake a sound costing? In Kenya, he was pivotal in helping us analyze a very complicated CDC-funded project, which sought to understand a 6-year data set looking at female sex workers' utilization of HIV services. Will served as our North Star and he guided us as we grappled with uncertainty, messy data, and complex contexts. Will cautioned his students to avoid linear thinking. And as I reflect back, this is precisely why he is so impactful in the global health field, a field where the problem of health services delivery is not simply addressed by building more clinics, but really by understanding the health-seeking behavior of population groups and understanding where and why trust is built between communities. He also understood the importance of healthcare innovators getting local buy-in for local problems to deliver global health solutions that would actually be accepted. And he was particularly insightful in how partnerships could be leveraged effectively to address research challenges and limitations. Will allowed us as students to witness how he thought and how he managed complexity. He allowed his students to enter his world and to witness how his brain worked. Often I felt like I was improving just by being in his presence. For me, I find it very impossible to express how transformative Will has been in my life. As a professor, he was one of a kind. They say life's most urgent and persistent question is, what are you doing for others? Will invested greatly in his students, and he cared deeply that we all thrived. They say a mentor is someone who sees more talent and ability within you than you see in yourself and helps bring it out of you. And that is what Will did for me as a student. He was an extraordinary mentor and a rare gem, and he was pivotal in how fulfilling and rich and intellectually stimulating my PhD journey was. For me, there's an incredible sadness in his passing, and his loss will forever be devastating. I feel really privileged to have been part of his life as a student and also as a co-author. I would like to now pass it on to Gautam.
Thank you very much. Folks, I'm Gautam Ahuja. I served Will served as my PhD advisor, but that is kind of very, very trivial in the bigger scheme of things and in what he has meant to me and people like me. In fact, but for Will, I would not be in this academic career, because it was Will's phone call to me when I was working as an executive in a multinational that first opened the doors to my coming to the program, but he opened them in a literal way, because I had written a statement of purpose, which when I actually reached Michigan and I realized what research was about, I was stunned at how I ever could have been admitted to a PhD program, because it showed my tremendous deficiencies and lack of understanding of what research is. But conversely, it also showed that Will was not the usual faculty member evaluating a PhD student. And so it ended up that I did show up at Michigan as an admitted student. But that was just the first of several such points at which my academic career should have reasonably been terminated, but it was not, largely because of, actually, I don't know. I don't know what went on in Will's mind, but I can only conjecture that he saw something, or he was genuinely very kind, which he was, and maybe all of that put together. But let me give you another vignette. 6 weeks after I joined the program, and I had spent a fair amount of time in the business world before I came back to academia. And 6 weeks into the program, we were, going through Will's seminar, and there were the readings, and we were contributing to the readings, and I thought life was going very well. And he sent me an email saying, "Can you come and see me?" And this is classic Will in what transpired. So I went to see him. As always, he was working on the computer, and he looked up, and I said, "Will, you'd asked me to stop by." Will was also our doctoral program advisor then. The chair, doctoral program chair. And he turned around to me, and here's how it happened. He simply said, "Gautam, the next time in my class, you say any of the following phrases, I will ask you to leave the class and possibly the program." And those phrases are, in my experience at Unilever, which is the company I'd worked for, or in the XYZ industry that you worked in, he says, check your work experience at the door and figure out what scholarship is. Now, I must confess that, of course, that night was a very troubling night for me. And my first reaction was not a very charitable one. I said, I am doing a PhD in strategy, not in theoretical physics. So how can the fact that I have spent 5 years actually doing strategy in a company be harmful? But then I would love to say that I had some higher order thought which said, oh, well, he must know better. No, that's not what I thought. What I thought was, well, he runs the program. And if I don't conform, I'm out. So not out of any innate sort of nobility or understanding, but simply out of fear and instrumentality, I said, okay, I will follow this rule. And it turned out that that was the fundamental thing that saved my academic career for me. Because what Will knew, and it's a very difficult thing to explain to somebody who was in my mindset, that being a good manager and being a good scholar on management are two completely different things. And if you want to learn the art of abstraction, you have to let go of the world of practice for some time. And then there's a time to bring it back, and you bring it back and you work on it, and that is there. But this is just one vignette. If we had hours, I could go on. And the net result of it was that I actually, I devoted myself to the art of abstraction. And I think my biggest sort of thing for this was, in my first thought, I had a paper accepted at ASQ, and the editor's thing was, the note said, letter said, the reviewers and I love the paper, but our only sort of sense is it's a little bit too abstract. Can you make it a little bit less abstract? And I mentally doffed my hat to Will and I said, okay, Will, you achieved what you wanted to do. Now I think the time has come for me to be a little less abstract as well. But for that abstraction that I learned, even if I had succeeded in finishing the PhD program in some way, I would never have succeeded beyond it. And so in that sense, I don't think that I can quantify the debt. Because when somebody changes your life in such dramatic terms, there is no way to sort of say this is how much I owe the person. I think, but I also had the good fortune. You've already heard about his various dimensions, and I won't repeat them because we don't have time. I think to me, above and beyond or underlying all those dimensions was what I really took away from Will. Is that Will was a great intellect. He was a great scholar. He was a great teacher. He was all of those things. He was a great PhD mentor. He was also a great administrator. I saw him as a department chair. I saw him as a PhD head. He had all of those things. But the reality is there was something else that he was. And that's what I remember him most for. He was the most complete exemplar of an academic. And that's because it's not that he ever said anything. I can't actually go back and say, Will said this to me and this and this and this. And I didn't have so many conversations with Will. I mean, I had, in terms of my totality of experience with him, what I did see was a lot of what he did. And so I learned more from what he did, not what he said. He was truly one of a kind, but he had no interest in being one of a kind. And that sort of sits at the bottom of what everybody is saying, that he was always building connections for people around him, is that he served as somebody who saw himself. I don't know this is not the kind of thing that Will ever talked about. But what I saw him as somebody who saw this life in academics as a service life, where you had boundless curiosity. His favorite phrase was, and which became embedded in all of our minds that came through Michigan at that time, is pick up a rock to see what is under it. And that's the thing he left with us. But very importantly, it's in everything he did, and even more importantly, in the things he didn't do, that he served as an exemplar. If there was a problem in the department, there was no politicking. Will would just do whatever is required to be done. For instance, there's a faculty member who doesn't want to teach a course, because there is some problem or some issue with the administration, Will just say, okay, you know what, I'll teach it, end of matter. Will is trying to teach a course and then realizes that the case material is not, very current or not saying what he wants it to. So he will just go back and write a case. I mean, in every respect, like Connie said, I have no idea how he did it. I mean, physically, I have no idea how any human being can do that. But this entirety of what he was, how he behaved in every one of his domains, I think that's what really left behind this, this idea for us that we are, that there is a debt that you owe to Will, which you can never repay, except by perhaps paying it forward. We will never be able to pay it in the quantum, but in what we are capable of, are we doing it or not? And it's in that sense that I think Will is timeless, because even today, and I know hopefully that 10 years from now, when I'm doing something, I am still, there is Will standing over my shoulder. He hasn't physically stood over my shoulder in 25 years now, but he is metaphorically standing over my shoulder in every discussion that I have, and every time I go into a classroom where I've been tired and exhausted with something else, and I'm wondering if I can, sort of wing it. Every time I'm speaking to a doctoral student, there is Will standing over my shoulder. And so I think that's the lesson that I would share with all of you, is that he left behind the idea of what it is to be a complete functioning academic in the stream of society. What we mean to the world as a whole Will stands for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gautam.
Thank you.
So in concluding, let me just do a couple things in a couple minutes. So first, I do want to take a second to, very deeply thank all of our speakers for taking the time and reflecting on their experiences with Will, and you can see both the breadth and the depth of impact that Will had across this many different things. The other thing I'd like to do is, again, pick up on this theme and something that Gautam just talked about also. It's on reflection that, in my mind, Will really lived the life of what an academic should be in the scope of activities, both the scholarship and the teaching and the impact beyond our little silo, but also the broader, business community and the world, quite frankly. And, when I reflect on my interactions with Will, one of the things I like to think is he was better at each one of those activities because he did all of those activities so well. And I think, has been alluded to, his scholarship has been affected by his teaching by his scholarship, his interactions, as Raman mentioned, in Africa, I knew, he held very dear, but affected his scholarship and teaching and what we do. And I think for those of us who are the academic members of the SMS, I think that's, as I mentioned, I find that a role model. And as George mentioned, this notion of the SMS and us being more than just a community of academics, this is a chance to really reflect on that and what that means. So thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Two things in concluding. One is, as we mentioned, we've not focused on the substance of Will's scholarship. We'd like to celebrate that, and we plan to do that in London at the SMS meetings. And one other thing too is, for those of you who are joining us live, Duke is concurrently having an event to remember Will, and they invite you to join them. I think, Ryan, you will put a link in the chat should people wish to join. And having said that, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us and reflecting on a good friend, a mentor, Will Mitchell.